You're not even part of this decision. Noah, it's my body, my choice. That sentence, it didn't just break my heart. It crushed every memory I had of the woman I once believed would be by my side until the very end. And the worst part, she said it, with her hand still resting on her belly where a child was growing, a child that wasn't mine. My name is Noah Mitchell. I'm 40 years old, a civil engineer living in Raleigh, North Carolina, 18 years ago. I fell in love with Emily for her gentle smile and the way she'd whisper, "I believe in you." Like even if the world came crashing down, we would still have each other. We have 3 kids. One is 9. The twins just turned 6. Our life seemed like a stable suburban house with a big backyard and simple dinners filled with laughter. I used to believe that if I loved enough and was patient enough, marriage would never break. Then, one March evening, I turned off the ignition after working late and walked in to find Emily sitting on the couch under a dim light, phone in hand, eyes avoiding mine. "Noah," she said, "I need to talk." Her voice was soft, almost emotionless, and I knew that tone she used every time she made a major decision, one that didn't include me. I stood still, something tightening in my chest. "Go on," I said, muting the TV with the remote. Emily tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A familiar gesture, once endearing. Now it gave me chills. "Chloe can't have kids," she began. "I'm going to be a surrogate for her and Derek." I froze. "You're going to," I emphasized. "You mean you've already started?" She nodded like we were talking about buying a new couch. "I've spoken to the doctor. The paperwork's been submitted. The embryo's been selected. I just need to start the hormone prep, and it's done." I sat down, my heart pounding like a drum. "You did all of this behind my back." "It's not behind your back. I just knew you wouldn't understand." She shrugged. "Derek and I discussed it thoroughly. Chloe's my twin sister, same genetics. I'm the perfect choice. Derek and her, not her and me. Her husband, the man who stood beside her through 3 births. The man who stayed up all night when our kids were sick. The man who was there when Chloe and Derek weren't." "I wouldn't understand," I hissed. "I think you should understand," she replied. "If you really love me, you'll support me." I stood up, staring at her like she was a stranger wearing Emily's face. "You want to carry Derek's child under this roof and expect me to just stand by like it's nothing? Don't be dramatic." "Noah." She folded her arms. "I didn't sleep with anyone. It's science. It's for family." I let out a bitter laugh, sharp as stone. "Family? You just destroyed your own family. If you go through with this, you're not my wife anymore." She didn't say anything, just turned her face away, but I saw it clearly in her eyes. I was no longer something that mattered. "What do you think of Emily's decision? If it were you, what would you do?" I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the coffee, not because of the ticking clock, but one question kept piercing my mind like a rusted shard of metal. When did I become someone who no longer deserves to be asked? Emily walked past me like I was a stranger next door, someone she had to keep informed out of courtesy, not someone whose agreement she needed. I remember the early days when she used to ask me about everything, from barbecue ribs to the color of our living room curtains. But now, a decision that affects our marriage, our kids, my dignity. She announced it like a weather report. "I'm doing it. You don't need to agree." That made me feel small, invisible. It was as if husband was just a temporary label used only when no one else in the house was willing to carry it. 2 days later, I came home earlier than usual. It was drizzling. In the kitchen, Emily was drawing hormone medication into a syringe, muttering the instructions under her breath. Next to her was a cooler labeled Fertility Express Clinic. The table was covered in medicine bottles. I stood there, watching. She didn't even look up. I asked, "Are you seriously going through with this?" Without even once looking back. I have looked back. Noah, on many nights. But in the end, I still believe this is the right thing to do. Right. For who? I asked, my voice cracking like shattered glass. For Chloe. For Derek. What about me, about our 3 kids? Did you ever think about that? She set the syringe down and let out a breath. Noah, you're acting like I've betrayed you. I didn't laugh. I didn't snap back. I just looked at her. For a long time. No, Emily, you didn't betray me. You erased me, like choosing a new sofa, but this time, you're choosing to be a mother to someone else's child, while still being my wife. Since that day, I started skipping dinner, ate alone in silence. I tried to stay composed in front of the kids, but sometimes, when the door closed behind me, I cried like a child. This pain, it doesn't have a name. It's a blend of being dismissed, being left out, and having your trust stolen. One night, my daughter drew a picture of 3 people, her, me, and Emily. She asked, "Daddy, are you sad because Mommy's having another baby?" I choked. Not because of the question, but because of the innocence in her eyes. Eyes that believed the adult world was as simple as sharing toys. I bent down, brushed her hair, and said, "Daddy's just sad, because Mommy didn't ask Daddy before she decided." I started writing the divorce papers, quietly, no scene, no warning, because I knew that if someone no longer sees you as part of their decisions, then you don't need to keep them in yours. From now on, I'm not a supporter. I'm the one walking away. And you know what? I'm not telling this story to gain pity. I'm telling it to remind someone out there, don't let your kindness become the excuse others use to trample your voice. If you've ever felt abandoned in your own life, subscribe to Revenge Insight. Here, we don't just share stories of betrayal. We share how to rise, how to reclaim your worth, and how one person that finds their way back to themselves. I no longer wait for Emily to change, and if I'm being honest, I no longer expect an apology from her either. Once someone sees you as an obstacle in their higher purpose, you stop being a partner. You become background noise. I decided I wouldn't let myself be dragged into the abyss without a fight. But revenge loud, angry revenge, no. I'm not that young or reckless anymore. I would do something calm, deliberate, legal, but painful. I started with the simplest place: paperwork, bank accounts, irregular expenses, pharmacy receipts, doctor's bills, every number, every statement, cold, silent proof of a betrayal that didn't need words. She used our joint money, without asking, without discussing, just like every other recent decision. If she and Derek thought it made sense, that was enough. One late afternoon, I ran into Derek in the kitchen, pouring milk from my fridge like he was staying in a long-term Airbnb. He looked at me and shrugged. "Emily needs a break. I'm just helping out." I looked at him and gave a dry smile. "Then help by getting out of my house." He froze, not expecting me to say it straight. But I was done. Done being polite to people who didn't deserve it. That night, I met with a lawyer and an old friend from college. I laid everything out. He was silent for a long time, then finally said, "Noah, you've got solid grounds, but you have to follow every step carefully and stay calm." I nodded. Calm was the only thing I had left in this house. But then, Emily started to weaken. One morning, I saw her slumped over the kitchen table, clutching her stomach, her face pale. I froze. In those few seconds, old memories came back. I had once carried her to the hospital when she was pregnant with the twins, held her hand through every contraction. But I just stood there. She looked up, sweat beading on her forehead. Probably hormones. "I'll be okay," she panted. I turned and walked away. She didn't need me when making her choices. I didn't need to be there now. A few days later, the blow came without warning. Chloe, Emily's redeemed twin sister, was hospitalized with heart complications. She couldn't care for the baby right after birth, which meant Emily would be keeping the baby after it was born. Not for a few weeks, maybe for months. The plan in my head to leave, to divorce, to cut clean, shattered like glass beneath my feet. I was trapped, with a wife pregnant with another man's child, with a family on the verge of collapse and still forced to play the role of stable dad for the kids. I thought I was one step ahead, but turns out this game doesn't follow a straight line, and the one who loses isn't always the one hit hardest. It's the one who never saw the knife coming from behind. I started to change the moment I realized I didn't need to win the argument anymore. I just needed to reclaim my life. No more pain, no more shaking with rage, just a clarity cold and sharp like a blade. If Emily chose to push me to the sidelines, then I would remove myself entirely from her circle. But this time, I wouldn't leave empty-handed. I went back to the lawyer. We went through every single expense from the joint account. There were bills Emily had signed off on without me. There were even forged signatures on the authorization forms for transfers to the clinic. Everything was neatly compiled into a case file. No harsh accusations. Just the facts. One evening, I came home from work. Emily was sitting on the sofa, holding a list of baby items she needed. Derek and Chloe had been around less and less, especially after Chloe had been hospitalized. Emily, meanwhile, was clearly exhausted. Her belly was big, her back in pain, and her eyes had lost all their fire. "Could you pick up a few things for me?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook. "No, Derek should do that. Or your mom. Not me." Emily turned away. But this time she didn't argue, didn't lash out. Just silence. And that silence was how I knew I was finally regaining control. I was no longer the one begging to be heard. Now I was the one others had to tread carefully around. Day by day, Emily became more dependent. She asked me to drive her to the doctor. I refused. She asked me to pick up her meds. I told her to call someone else. Every time, she looked at me as if to ask, "Are you really going to let me handle this on my own?" And every time, I answered with a look that said, "You made your choice, Emily. This is the result." Then, on a Saturday morning, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I walked outside and saw Derek carrying a few shopping bags, baby clothes, bottles, and anti-roll pillows. He walked up like he was making a delivery. I folded my arms and blocked the door. "Leave the stuff on the porch." Derek looked up, confused. "What, this house isn't a drop-off point for your and Chloe's plans. Take it to your own place, not here." "Emily's pregnant." "Man, right. And that's because of you and her. So don't expect me to play caretaker." Derek's face flushed red. He picked up the bags and turned around. For the first time, he didn't just barge into my home like he used to. That day, I went into my office and opened my inbox. There was a message from the lawyer. The preliminary hearing for the divorce had been scheduled. I read it over and over, not because I doubted it, but because it felt like a new heartbeat. a sign that I was finally pulling myself out of this swamp, with the law, with reason, and with the same cold silence. Emily once used to shut me out. This time I wasn't yelling anymore. I just smiled, a small smile, but heavy as stone. It rained the entire day Emily gave birth. Not a downpour, just that persistent, drizzly kind of rain, like our marriage at the time. I lay in the room, staring at the ceiling, trying to tune out the frantic knocking and her moans echoing down the hallway. "I'm going into labor. Grant, please." I didn't respond. I used to be the first person she turned to when she was in pain. Now, I was just a scar in her memory, easy to ignore, and I had learned how to ignore her pleas, too. She called an ambulance herself. I heard the chaos of footsteps, the wailing siren in the distance, and then the front door shut behind them, leaving the house cold and hollow, for the first time in months. I exhaled. 3 days later, she came back. She looked exhausted, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. In her hands was an infant car seat, a soft pink blanket draped over the tiny, sleeping face. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Then the baby. "Chloe's still in the hospital," she exhaled, setting the car seat on the floor. "Kevin's been juggling between 2 places. I have to take care of her for a few weeks." I raised an eyebrow. "Her? You're calling that baby her now?" Emily turned away. "Don't start. Noah, I'm exhausted." "Oh, you're exhausted. Still playing mother for someone else," I said, my voice flat and cold. "So, when are you planning to move your things out of my house?" She froze. "It's our house, Noah." "No." I stepped closer. "You stepped out of that hour the day you signed an ultrasound form with another man. This house belongs to me and my 3 kids now. You're just borrowing space." Emily didn't answer. She simply picked up the baby carrier and disappeared into the living room. That baby's cries woke the entire house every night. Emily stumbled through the dark, rocking her, changing diapers and making formula. Sometimes, she'd come knock on my door. "Noah, just 10 minutes. I haven't slept at all today." I never opened the door. I just quietly turned off the bedside lamp. The next morning, as I was getting the kids ready for school, my daughter asked, "Daddy, why does Mommy only hold that baby and not us anymore?" I looked at her, heart tightening. "Mommy's tired, but Daddy's always here. For you." Emily's exhaustion dragged on. She started forgetting the kids' breakfast, doing the laundry, and doctor appointments. One evening, I came home from work to find her passed out on the sofa, the baby wailing red-faced in the crib with no one attending. I didn't touch a thing. I just took a photo, not for revenge, but as proof that I was not a negligent father. The hearing came a week later. Emily showed up late, clothes rumpled, face worn. Kevin and Chloe sat behind her, eyes down the entire time. While my lawyer presented our case, Emily just sat silently, lips trembling. We submitted everything: unauthorized bank withdrawals, forged signatures, medical records. Each piece of evidence is like a scalpel, no deep cuts, but steady, precise. Finally, the judge looked up. Her voice was firm and clear. "The respondent has unilaterally broken marital consent, misused shared assets, and created instability for the 3 minor children." She paused. "This court awards full custody to the plaintiff. There will be no financial obligation toward the surrogate child, no spousal support." Emily cried, not loudly, not in anguish. Just a quiet shaking of her shoulders, tears dripping one by one like she'd finally realized it was truly over. She had nothing left to cling to, and I finally stood tall, Not over her, but on the pride she once trampled. Emily moved out on a quiet morning. No yelling, no tears, just the sound of suitcase wheels crunching over gravel and the soft click of the door closing behind her. The three kids stood by the window, watching their mother walk away with a small suitcase and an empty bassinet. The baby Chloe's child had been moved back to their home once she recovered. Emily slipped out of our lives as if she'd never been a part of it. But no one in the house felt as light as I once imagined we would. I used to think the day we signed the divorce papers would be the end. But healing, it turns out, isn't about cutting ties. It's about learning to stand in front of a deep crack and not let it define the rest of your life. A month later, I ran into Emily at the schoolyard. She was there to pick up the kids for the weekend. Same familiar face, but faded, like a photograph left out too long in the rain. She looked at me, hesitant. "Are you doing okay?" I nodded. "The kids are good, so am I." She bit her lip. "Noah, I know I hurt you. Maybe too much, for you to ever forget." I didn't say anything right away, just looked into the eyes that once gave me peace. Now, all I saw in them was regret. I replied softly, "I haven't forgotten, but I'm not holding on anymore." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resentment either. It was just a way to finally lay it all down. As I walked toward the car, my little girl ran up and hugged my leg. "Can we have pizza?" "Daddy." I picked her up and smiled. "Pizza, cartoons, and a late bedtime. But don't tell Mommy." "Okay," she laughed brightly, carefree. And for the first time in months, I felt calm inside. I didn't need to win. I just needed peace. If you've ever been hurt, have you ever been abandoned in your own home? Remember, you're not alone. Leave a comment if you've ever been in my shoes. Share this story if you think someone else needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Insight, where we step out of the dark and find light again in our own way.